December 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor has finally brought the US into the Second World War.
The Axis powers are not going to win this war.
Now, with the help of America, the Allies plan to smash the U-boats that threaten Britain's shipping lifeline. But the Germans have plans of their own, and have set their sights on a new target.
Everything was fair game.
And I remember looking around and thinking, you know, we're not all going to make it.
Germany's U-boats are about to bring the war straight to the unsuspecting shores of the United States. December 1941. U-123, a German long-range sub, leaves on a top-secret mission. It is commanded by Reinhard Hardigan, one of the Third Reich's most daring and successful U-boat aces.
I set off on the 23rd of December. I didn't want to leave on the 24th because I didn't want any of my crew to turn up on the morning of Christmas Eve from the brothels or from having been drinking. I only had orders to sail, and I had an envelope with me, which I was to open after the 10th degree west.
4 days into his voyage, Hardigan opens his secret orders. He discovers his mission is part of a bold new plan that the Germans hope could turn the tide of the entire war.
Operation Drumbeat is the German plan to take all of the U-boats they possibly can across the American seaboard and to hit the Americans as hard as possible, as soon as possible, before they're ready.
The mission is so secret that Hardigan's orders are missing key documents.
Man hat uns deswegen kein Kartenmaterial mitgegeben, weil dann
We weren't given any maps because then somebody at home could have gotten wind of the fact that submarines were heading to America.
The architect of this plan is Karl Dönitz, the mastermind of German U-boat strategy. Dönitz has long wanted to attack American shipping, but Hitler refused to give the order, fearing it would pull the US into the battle. Now, with America in the war, Dönitz can finally strike.
The lifting of all restrictions regarding USA ships has been ordered by the Führer. Attempts must be made to capitalize as quickly as possible on these advantages and to achieve a spectacular success off the American coast.
Dönitz is keen to pounce on American shipping while the nation still reels from the shock of Pearl Harbor. With all eyes on the Pacific War, Dönitz believes that no one will be looking for U-boats on the East Coast. To achieve his objective, Dönitz must rely on the biggest sub in his arsenal, the Type 9. Over 76 meters long, it is longer than a 747 jet. It carries 48 men and 22 torpedoes. It has enough food and fuel to reach the US and hunt for up to 2 weeks before having to turn back. Dönitz sends Hardigan and 4 other U-boat aces to the eastern seaboard of North America to start Operation Drumbeat. 2 will sail to the east coast of Canada, while Hardigan and 2 others will head to the United States. Their mission: sink merchant ships.
When I opened the envelope, it transpired that I had the New York position. We assumed that the Americans would be very surprised because they wouldn't have expected that German submarines could get as far as the coast.
January the 11th, 1942. Hardigan and the crew have been at sea for 19 days. Then, 480 kilometers east of Cape Cod, they spot the SS Cyclops.
And what you do see first is smoke. Most of the ships at that time were coal-fired, and they created smoke when they were underway.
Ich hatte ja die Aufgabe.
I had the order to sail to New York, but I had the go-ahead to attack should I come across a ship larger than 10,000 tons.
Hardigan must make a difficult decision. Operation Drumbeat is to start in 2 days, and the other U-boats have yet to reach the US coast. If he attacks now, there is a risk that the US will find out that the Germans are sailing to American waters. But such a large ship is too great a prize to resist. The men of U-123 are ordered to their action stations. The crew of SS Cyclops has no idea their ship is being stalked. Among the men is Ken Ramsden, an anti-aircraft gunner.
We didn't think there were U-boats about there, at that, in that vicinity at that time.
No merchant ships have been attacked this close to the US before, so none of the crew is watching for U-boats. The ship is bound for Halifax, carrying over 100 sailors who have volunteered to work on Allied merchant ships. At 1:49 in the morning, Hardigan gives the order to fire.
Los.
High explosives are packed into the nose, primed for maximum destruction.
I don't think any had been sunk that far west. We thought it was probably a mine.
The SS Cyclops radio operator knows better. Frantically, he tries to contact naval authorities. Hardigan's U-boat picks up the message. He must silence the Cyclops before anyone on shore receives the distress call and discovers the Germans have arrived.
The first thing I did was to try to hit the bridge and radio room with artillery, so that the ship wouldn't signal.
Ken Ramsden climbs down a rope, only to find that the lifeboat has sunk.
One of them shouted to me, "Get back on the ship, Ken." I said, "I can't climb the rope." So the only thing I could do was to jump in the water. And it was freezing. I saw some red lights in the distance, and I swam towards them.
I saw that the crew went into the lifeboats, and when I believed the ship had been abandoned, I let fire.
So I was clinging onto the lifeboat when the second torpedo hit the side. And she went down then.
Miraculously, the radio operator escapes and swims to Ken Ramsden's lifeboat. Ramsden learns that despite the efforts of the attacking U-boat, the SOS was picked up by the Coast Guard. Ken Ramsden has survived, but 100 other men have lost their lives. The first victims of Operation Drumbeat. Hardigan's failure to silence the Cyclops now jeopardizes the entire mission. British intelligence understands the significance of the sinking. They immediately wire the US Navy about the impending danger. Hardigan flees south, convinced that the US will send warships to find and destroy his U-boat. Days later, he boldly enters the approaches to New York City. It is a remarkable moment for the young U-boat commander. He is the first German sailor in the Second World War to see the shores of the United States.
Everywhere was lit up and all the ships were traveling with their positioning lights on. It was pure paradise for a submarine because the defense was practically non-existent and completely inexperienced.
For years, Americans have watched the Battle of the Atlantic from afar as it unfolded in papers and newsreels. Now, the cream of Germany's U-boat fleet is unleashing the war on America's very doorstep. January 15th, 1942. 5 U-boats have arrived off the North American coast. U-123, commanded by Reinhard Hardigan, takes up position off the south shore of Long Island, New York. At 1:40 in the morning, a lookout spots the Coimbra, a large British oil tanker.
The tankers were so prized because oil, as it is now, is a commodity that's sought after. No fuel, no action.
Hardigan moves his U-boat into attack position.
I saw a shadow and could establish his course exactly. We got in front of him, and then I hit him. There was a huge ball of fire that was over 200 meters high. And after a massive explosion, the whole ship underwater burned. You got the impression that you could have seen the blaze from New York. It was so huge.
In the next 2 weeks, the 5 U-boats sent by Dönitz wreak havoc. "23 ships are sunk. 8 of them are claimed by Hardigan, making it one of the most successful missions of the war. An ecstatic Dönitz radios his congratulations to the crew of U-123.
He sent a message. For the drum beater Hardigan, well done. Good beating.
Dönitz orders more U-boats to the killing grounds. The job of stopping the U-boats falls to Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Naval Forces.
Well, King is a long-term professional U.S. naval officer. He's come from a pretty basic background and made his way in the U.S. Navy as a hard-driving, tough, no-nonsense naval officer. Difficult, irascible, hard man.
His daughter said one time about him when someone accused him of occasionally having a bad temper, she said, "That's nonsense. My father has a perfectly even temper. He's angry all the time."
Unfortunately for the Allies, King's energy is focused elsewhere.
In early 1942, King is thoroughly preoccupied with the Pacific War. And it becomes King's particular task to win that war.
As the losses mount off the East Coast, King is pressured by the British to establish convoys, large groups of ships that sail together protected by armed escorts. He refuses, claiming that he lacks the destroyers needed to guard them.
He didn't get the convoy system. What he thought was if you didn't have enough escorts, you couldn't convoy. What the British knew was that any convoy is better than no convoy because at least you reduce the spread of the target. Normal merchant shipping means there'll be one passing every 10 minutes. If you convoy, there's only one in a block.
Sailing alone, the ships are easy pickings for the U-boats. Curious Americans flock to the nation's beaches to watch for U-boat attacks.
I can recall when I was a child, living in Brooklyn, New York, my father took me down to Shore Road, way down at the end of the harbor, and pointed to what he said were American ships on fire in the far distant horizon.
Other Americans become unwitting accomplices of the U-boat commanders.
They'd drive their cars up to the shoreline, and maybe 20 cars, you know, and with families all out there with binoculars looking for survivors in the water. Well, they'd shine their headlights at night, and of course, they'd silhouette the ships traveling down, and the U-boats just used to wait there.
Hardigan is astonished by the lack of countermeasures.
Around Great Britain, you were in waters with strong defense, because the English knew exactly what they had to do. So that made things rather difficult, while the Americans were completely harmless.
As the winter of 1942 progresses, Britain becomes increasingly desperate for vital supplies. Prime Minister Churchill and his commanders are frustrated by Admiral King's refusal to adopt the convoy system.
He won't take any advice from the British. This is a man who hates the British. He wasn't interested in British opinion. He wasn't interested in learning from British experience.
Dwight Eisenhower once said that the war would have ended sooner if somebody had shot Ernie King. The Brits often felt that Ernie King had a particular dislike for the British, which may have been true, but it appears that King disliked everybody who wasn't in the U.S. Navy.
For the Allies, the unthinkable seems to have happened. America's entrance into the Battle of the Atlantic has been an unmitigated disaster. Desperate to end the carnage, Churchill convinces King to change his tactics. Facing a storm of protest, King finally relents and begins to implement trial convoys. Dönitz U-boats have sunk a staggering 2 million tons of shipping in just 4 months. But with the belated establishment of trial convoys, the situation is rapidly improving.
Closing in on U-boat. Get ahead.
When U-boat ace Reinhard Hardigan returns to the US coast on a second mission in late March 1942, he finds hunting conditions have changed. The air teems with aircraft searching for U-boats. It is getting hard to hunt without being hunted down. 15 days after reaching his hunting grounds, U-123 is spotted by a plane on anti-sub patrol. The pilot quickly transmits the U-boat's position to a nearby destroyer. Hardigan dives and is depth charged.
I had my detective novel with me, and I pretended that I was reading, along the lines that if the old man is reading, then things can't be that bad. And then my watch officer, Hans von Schröder, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Captain, you have your book upside down."
U-123 has suffered engine damage during the attack. It lies crippled on the ocean floor under 20 meters of water. There is little chance it can surface, much less outrun a destroyer. Hardigan decides there is only one course of action left for his crew: swim to the surface.
And we planned to abandon ship, and I could hear him hunting back and forth above us, and yet he wasn't setting off any depth charges. And then I noticed they were moving a bit further away.
Hardigan decides to try and save the sub. For over an hour, they toil in complete silence. Finally, with some power restored, Hardigan attempts to surface.
And then, using the electric motor, because we couldn't use the diesels, we crept forward a bit.
For 2 agonizing minutes, the U-boat remains on the ocean floor. Finally, it begins to rise.
I was lucky.
The destroyer has sailed off, convinced it has sunk its prey. Hardigan limps home to base in France. He is hailed as a national hero. Hundreds are on hand to welcome the man who brought the war to America. Having sunk some 24 ships to date, Hardigan joins the pantheon of Germany's most famous U-boat aces. By late May, almost all shipping on the East Coast travels in convoys protected by air cover and warships. Shipping losses drop dramatically. The Allied losses are staggering. Over 300 ships, including 129 tankers, have been sunk.
Pearl Harbor was terrible, but the carnage that occurs along the American East Coast is probably still the single biggest catastrophic naval defeat that I can think of.
Dönitz has scored a massive blow against the Allies, dramatically reducing the amount of supplies reaching Britain. Despite the success of Dönitz's attack on American shipping, Hitler is largely unimpressed with the U-boats. In the spring of 1942, his attention is focused elsewhere. His army is locked in a desperate battle against Russian forces in Eastern Europe. The increasingly bitter campaign is putting a heavy demand on Germany's resources.
Dönitz is popular with Hitler. He really is a very good Nazi. But the German Navy is not popular with Hitler at all, who would like to scrap most of it and redeploy the resources.
Hitler openly wonders if steel earmarked for subs would be better used by his armies battling the Soviets. Following his triumphant return from America, U-boat ace Reinhard Hardigan is sent to discuss the situation with Hitler.
And when I was in the Führer's headquarters, I made Hitler very angry, because I said to him, "Herr Führer, you're standing with your back to the sea and only looking at the land, and you don't know that this is a sea war and not a land war. The war won't be won on land. This war will only be decided on the sea."
With the adoption of convoys by the Americans, the German U-boats have lost the upper hand. Dönitz must find a way to retake control. In May of 1942, Dönitz orders his U-boats into Canada's St. Lawrence River. Attacks in America focused on the coast, but now the U-boats brazenly sail hundreds of kilometers deep into enemy territory. The bulk of all Canadian shipping bound for Britain sails through this bottleneck. An attack here could dramatically cut supplies reaching Britain. The river is a perfect environment for Dönitz U-boats. In the vast Atlantic, convoys can be almost impossible to find. In the river, shipping comes to them.
So what the Germans end up doing is usually positioning 2 submarines in the St. Lawrence and just allow the shipping to pass in front of them.
But there's another benefit for subs hunting here. Sonar, or ASDIC, has been designed for work in the deep, cold ocean. But in the St. Lawrence, the sound waves have trouble penetrating the layers of river water and salt water. The beam becomes distorted and the subs become almost invisible. Beginning in May of 1942, his U-boats terrorize shipping sailing down the St. Lawrence. In late summer, Dönitz unleashes what he hopes will be the decisive blow. September 6th, 1942. QS-33, a small convoy of 13 ships, sails from Quebec City to Sydney, Nova Scotia. 2 submerged U-boats shadow them. The corvette HMCS Arrowhead is one of the convoy's escorts. On board is 21-year-old sonar operator Jeff Smith.
We were coming down the coast. We were only about a mile or so offshore, and there was a merchant ship on the starboard side of us, and I was looking out the bridge cabin window, and I could see the ship coming along, and I watched his silhouette cut the lighthouse light that was still on. I thought, boy, wouldn't that be a perfect target for a boom!
A torpedo fired from one of the U-boats slams into the hull of the IES, a Greek freighter loaded with thousands of tons of lumber and steel. Manning one of the Arrowhead's sonar stations, Smith must find the U-boat before it strikes again.
Echo sweep, red 40, red 90.
We would sweep either side of us, maybe 10 or 15 degrees, and you send out a ping. But if it hits anything, it goes ping, whoop, ping, whoop, ping, whoop.
Smith knows the U-boat is there, but he's unable to obtain a solid contact.
You might get one good ping and then wouldn't get another for 10 minutes, or you never knew what you were going to get. Sometimes you wouldn't get anything, you just get mush.
Hidden by the turbulent waters of the St. Lawrence, the U-boat remains undetected. The Arrowhead sails back to help the crew of the stricken cargo ship.
Here, 5 degrees starboard, sir.
We started yanking them out of the water. Some were burnt. You got 10 or 15 guys lying around, all in extreme agony and pain. Arms dangling off their shoulders and all sorts of crazy things. You gotta do something. So we did what we could.
A second U-boat now moves in to attack the convoy. It is Commander Paul Hartvig's first mission, and he is keen to make a name for himself as a U-boat ace. The crew of the corvette Arrowhead have no idea that Hartvig has penetrated the convoy.
I got off duty and I went back to the stern where one of my pals was a stern lookout. And was standing smoking a cigarette and looked down the water. I said, oh, look at the porpoises. My friend said, my God, they're not porpoises, they're torpedoes.
Hartvig has simultaneously fired 3 torpedoes at 3 different ships.
Bang, they were gone in minutes.
010.
The Arrowhead manages to obtain a faint sonar contact on the sub.
308.
You're going after him, ping, ping, whoop, ping, ping, whoop, and you're cutting across him. And you got him right dead in your sights, so to speak. Your sights on your head.
306.
The Arrowhead strikes back with a depth charge attack.
And the noise is incredible, unbelievable, the dynamite exploding around you.
Almost like a giant sledgehammer hitting an immovable object.
And you don't know whether you're going to be alive 2 minutes from now or not.
The Arrowhead continues its attack.
You start off at 1,500 yards. You're getting right down to 500 yards. Pretty short ping whoops. And all of a sudden, bugger all.
The U-boat seems to have vanished. Hartvig has deployed a Pillenwerfer, a German invention used to block Allied sonar beams.
Pillenwerfer in effect, a gigantic Alka-Seltzer tablet, so when it's dropped in the water, it effervesces like crazy, and the effervescent causes a bubble curtain that deflects your ASDIC, so you lose contact with the submarine.
Hartwig escapes, and his rampage continues, sinking 3 more ships. The Canadians launch an all-out hunt to find and destroy Hartwig. Weeks later, Hartwig slips out of Canadian waters undetected and heads back to base in France. His success is taken as proof of the overstretched Canadian Navy's inability to protect its own backyard. The Canadian government closes the St. Lawrence to international shipping. Dönitz has struck another massive blow against the Allies. With the closing of the St. Lawrence, Canadian exports to Britain drop by an alarming rate. What was once feared is now quickly becoming reality. Britain cannot hold out much longer. The Allies seem to be losing the Battle of the Atlantic. Throughout 1942, losses to U-boats have skyrocketed. But there is one bright spot in the gloom. American industry is churning out ships at a furious pace. Many of the new vessels are Liberty ships. Introduced in 1941, the first ship took 245 days to complete. They're now being made in just 8 weeks. Each of these floating warehouses can carry hundreds of tanks or enough food to feed 500,000 people for almost 1 week. The Allies' plan is simple. Flood the Atlantic with more Liberty ships than their U-boats can ever possibly sink. But the Germans have been busy too. Despite Hitler's earlier misgivings, the U-boat fleet is growing rapidly.
The Germans carried on building U-boats, and the numbers went up. It would soon be possible to walk to New York from Bordeaux on the pressure hulls of German U-boats.
By year's end, the fleet should number almost 400. 100 more than Dönitz claims he needs to win the war. With these new boats come rumors of terrifying new tactics. In a secret meeting in mid-spring 1942, Hitler suggests that sub-commanders should execute any survivors of a U-boat attack. It is a grim reminder of what's happening on land. Throughout Britain, Germany and the Soviet Union, thousands of innocent lives are lost to air raids, invasion or siege. The line between civilian and soldier is being erased. Aided by Allied propaganda, rumors circulate that the Germans are adopting horrific new practices at sea.
The popular propaganda of the time was that the Germans were butchers. And they would think nothing of machine gunning men in lifeboats.
In 1942, Brian Clark serves as a radio operator aboard a freighter, the Sithonia. In July, Clark has given a first-hand look at how U-boat commanders are waging war in the Atlantic.
We were one of 5 ships leaving, and we, being only 9.5 knots, were the slowest of the 5 ships.
A few days into the voyage, they receive a distress signal from a ship sailing nearby in their convoy. They have been torpedoed. Now Clark's crew fear they could be next.
From then on, all the crew were always looking out for periscope trails and submarines and so on. 42 on the crew, and we were all lookouts.
10:30 p.m. Brian Clark is dozing in his bunk.
And with a huge crunching explosion, I must tell you that it doesn't just assail the ears, it overtakes all of you. You become the epicenter of noise.
The Sithonia has taken a direct hit and is sinking quickly.
We'd barely sort of got away when the poor old Sithonia sort of gave up the ghost and slid to the bottom with a great hiss of steam and a cracking of wood and awfulness. And then you suddenly find yourself sitting in a cockle shell in the Atlantic Ocean, which is massive. And suddenly, out of the darkness, came this megaphone shout in excellent English, "What ship are you?"
The voice belongs to Adalbert Schnee, commander of the attacking sub. The men in the lifeboat fear for their lives.
The feeling was generally of fear that the German would turn his machine guns on us. He said, did you get a call sign away, a distress signal? And we said, no, we didn't. He said, okay, give me your call sign and I'll send one for you. He said, steer a course north-northeast and you'll get to the Canary Islands in 4 or 5 days. With that, he shouted, bon voyage, and he slid off into the night.
The propaganda about Germans machine gunning survivors proves unfounded in this case. Brian Clark is lucky. Just weeks later, Dönitz issues his men with new orders that will affect the lives of all merchant seamen.
No attempts of any kind must be made at rescuing members of ships sunk. Rescue runs counter to the most primitive demands of warfare for the destruction of enemy ships and crews. Be hard. Remember that the enemy has no regard for women and children when he bombs German cities.
The war in the Atlantic has entered a new deadly phase that both sides are determined to win, whatever the cost. For much of the year, Dönitz has fought a guerrilla war on the fringes of the Atlantic. Single U-boats ambushing lone merchant ships. But as the winter approaches, he decides to target entire convoys taking critical supplies to Britain.
Dönitz realizes that the transit times to Latin America, the transit times to the Caribbean are so long that most of the submarines are spending their time in transit and not actually sinking shipping. If you want a real quick turnaround, you send them into the middle of the North Atlantic where the transit times are short and the target opportunity is rich.
It is a dangerous plan. The convoys travel with protection.
Radar echo bearing!
Heavily armed escorts sail with the merchant ships. And for much of the route, they are accompanied by airplanes carrying depth charges. But Dönitz knows the convoys have an Achilles heel. There's a vast swathe of ocean in the middle of the North Atlantic, out of the range of Allied planes. The air gap.
There's a kind of dead zone in the middle, the air gap, where existing conventional aircraft can't operate effectively. Whether they're flying from Iceland or Northern Ireland or Newfoundland, they can't quite get into there and operate effectively.
Dönitz knows that in the air gap, he won't have to worry about airplanes. And to deal with the remaining escorts, he decides to use his wolf packs, large groups of U-boats that strike convoys simultaneously. To ensure success, Dönitz plans to coordinate the attacks himself. His next target, SC-107, a convoy of 42 ships that left New York bound for Britain on the 24th of October. Their Canadian escort consists of one destroyer and a handful of corvettes. In 1942, the Canadian Navy escorts over 1/3 of transatlantic convoys. To meet this obligation, the Navy's expanded rapidly. Men are often rushed to the Atlantic with little training. Cullis Lancaster sails aboard a corvette assigned to defend SC-107.
We only had 16 weeks of training before we went to sea, and then in that 16 weeks, there was only one 8-hour session before the converted yacht. That was the only time we went to sea.
The escorts receive a chilling radio transmission. A wolf pack shadows SC-107. Dönitz has deployed 17 U-boats with instructions to destroy the convoy. On the night of November the 1st, the wolf pack moves into position. Leading the attack is Baron Siegfried von Forstner, a master tactician and experienced sub-commander. The plan is simple but extremely deadly. Hit the convoy from every direction at the same time.
Coordinated attacks from multiple directions cause the escort forces to react instead of allowing them to be proactive. That's the key to beating down their defenses.
Engines full speed ahead. Engines full ahead.
One of the things you try to do is keep the submarine down, because they could only travel at 3 knots when they were down.
Steer 25 port, sir.
The minute the submarine submerges, the convoy has a speed advantage. And the idea is get the submarine down, get the convoy away, and force the submarine to play a catch-up game.
Just before midnight, von Forstner sees his chance. As the escort's sole destroyer chases down another U-boat, von Forstner strikes. The Canadians strike back. Von Forstner is forced to crash dive and is depth charged. But as the Canadians focus on destroying von Forstner, other subs move in for the kill.
My best description of what's happening when convoy ships are being sunk by a wolf pack is utter chaos.
Von Forstner escapes the earlier depth charging and strikes 2 more ships.
You still have to fight. And if we lost 15 out of 45, there are still 30 there that have got to be delivered to the port of destination.
Guns ready.
Even today I can sort of hear the noise of ships going up.
Despite the efforts of the escorts, 8 ships are sunk in one harrowing night. For the next 2 days, the convoy is hammered by the U-boats as the escorts push to clear the air gap. Dönitz's strategy has worked. In just 4 days, his packs have sent 15 ships to the bottom of the Atlantic. But SC-107 has one last hope. The convoy has finally cleared the air gap. News of the slaughter reaches the Western Approach's war room in Liverpool, the nerve centre of Allied naval forces. A handful of bombers is dispatched from Iceland in an attempt to save what is left of the shattered convoy. One is flown by Terence Bullock.
We used to get up at about 5 in the morning and fly for about 700 miles to where these U-boats were.
5 hours later, Bullock reaches SC-107. He spots a sub and attacks.
Well, if they spotted you, they'd start shooting at you. But I used to stalk them down to about 50 feet, lying straight and level, firing at the U-boats. And up front, I had 4 20mm cannons. Come in at an angle of 20 degrees to get more depth charges along the side of the U-boats.
Bullock's well-aimed attack destroys a sub prowling at the convoy's flanks. The pack flees to avoid destruction. The aircraft scatter 5 subs and sink another. Days later, the convoy makes its way into protected British waters. It is the hardest hit convoy in over a year. Of the 42 ships that set sail, only 27 arrive. The lessons of SC-107 are clear. Until the air gap is closed once and for all, the wolf packs will continue to decimate Allied shipping. As 1942 comes to an end, the Germans seemed poised on the edge of victory in the Atlantic. Dönitz U-boats have sunk almost 1,200 ships. The Allies must find a way to defeat Dönitz's wolf packs or lose the war.